Welcome back to the Lost Facility devlog series, and in this video we're going to take a further look at our canyon walls and figure out the final kind of solution that we came up with. So this project file will be available on Patreon. This running project file is available there, as well as all of the stuff that we create along with it. So if you want to grab any of that, you can do that on Patreon. But let's go ahead and take a look at the final kind of design, what we are going to be doing here. So this, I know we kind of been focusing on this little terrain, this one terrain here for a little bit, but it's very important that we get this right in the solution here, right? Because we're essentially going to do this for multiple terrains. This is kind of going to be our kind of solution to get the final rendered geometry for our terrains. So in our convert height field, right before that, I've laid down this mask by feature node. And in here, I have masked out these slopes because we want to use this later on in our process. And I've actually made a little bit of a mistake, but I'm not going to change that here. It's not that big of a deal in this case, but I did want to include the tops of this terrain as well. So I would get rid of these little points here. And I'm just masking out the bottom because I don't want to displace this geometry down here. I only really want the cliff faces. So the canyon floor here I can leave kind of unscathed. So if we take a look at our convert height field node, if we take a look at the geometry spreadsheet, we have a mask attribute. We're going to be using that later on. And all I've done is created a group that just sections off half of our geometry. So it is a bounding box with a 1000 by 1000 with the center set to 500 in the X, so it selects right down the middle, and I'm just blasting away that half of the geometry. Then I just remesh and subdivide it. This is just to get a higher resolution mesh so that we have something to displace the geometry with, or a little bit easier to displace the geometry with, I should say. So I've added down this triplanar displacement, and what I've done in this triplanar displacement is not actually displaced it, but added a color. This is the texture that we created in Gaia, so just texture scale set to 0.015. Then we're taking that and we're attribute adjust color just to add some contrast to that. And that is just going to allow us to kind of fine tune our mesh. And then I've added normals, and then they're point normals, and then I'm blurring them with a value of like 400. So we want to get a lot of blur going on the normals just to make it so the geometry doesn't kind of collapse in on itself so easily. And then I've taken a attribute VOP or point VOP here, and we're displacing along those normals. So I'm taking the color and then going a vector to float. We're taking that, we're multiplying it by a value that we've promoted that parameter to, so we can affect that outside of this point VOP, and then we're displacing that amount by the normals, or along the normals. And if we zoom in here, you can see kind of what that does. It's creating this kind of jaggedy section, which is adding that detail back in for us. So then we add our normals back in with this, just to make it look more like a actual mesh here. Looks more normal there, just with some color applied. And then we're taking our point VOP here again, and we're doing a couple of things. And this is kind of where we blend with that mask. And this is kind of the final look here. Just add some normals again here. Let's just take a look at that actually. And then we can dive into our point VOP. So if I take a look inside of our point VOP here, I'm taking essentially the same thing with the displace along normals, just place that into the point position. And then I'm taking our color and I'm multiplying that by a op input 2. So our second input, if we take a look here, is just our original subdivide with no triplanar displacement on it. I'm taking the color attribute from that, which is vector 3. I'm fitting that from negative 0.5 to 0.5 because it was 0 to 1, because I want it to push into the geometry while also pushing out So the black is going to push in, the white parts are going to push out. I guess that's, yeah. And then we're going to multiply that by the color of our input here. And in our multiply here, we're adding another parameter that we've promoted to give us a little bit more control over how much that is pushing and pulling. I'm also multiplying that by this mask attribute. And that is going to just enable us to not displace down here. So if I just disconnect this, you can see that that's going to displace the bottom of our geometry here as well. So you can see the bottom is now being displaced. If I wire that back in, down here in the bottom of our canyon where that mask was not, we're not going to be displacing, which just cleans it up a little bit. So that gives us our final look here. And just to show you, it does have our attributes or our UVs still on the geometry, which is how we're actually going to shade this mesh. Just got an attribute from map here with a texture that I've exported from Gaia, just a terrain texture. I'm not actually going to use this in the final build. I just wanted to use this to test out, make sure that we were getting that UVs that we had before, because that's how we are going to texture this. And then I have just set up simple little render settings here, just a material library. I did set it up for Redshift in this just to render out thumbnails and stuff, and for this video as well as future videos, so I don't have to keep dropping that down. But just a simple material library with the geometry assigned to geometry set with our canyon floor just dragged in there. It's a simple Redshift VOPNet. All I've done is taken that texture that we had in that attribute from map. I'm piping it into a color correction, the contrast set up, and then a color layer so that we can make sure that it is all working fine, which I'll show you that here in a second. I've added a dome light with the base property set to just a texture that I've downloaded from what it used to be, it's HDRA Haven. I think it's called something different now, but that's what it is. And then in Redshift settings, I've come to dome, and then this environment allows you to turn off the background in there. That's where it is located in Solaris. And then I've just added a camera and our Redshift prop here. And if I take a look at our final render here, just to show you what I did to demonstrate this, the texture anyways. So this is the final render with the displacement. You can really kind of see the displacement in here along these cliffs. And if I switch on over to the second input or the second render frame, this is the before and this is the after. So you can see that we get quite a bit of detail back into those cliffs, which is super, super nice. So that's what we want. Now I may just tweak this more just to get more detail into this. I'm not really sure. We'll see how it is, but the overall kind of setup has been created with this, so we should be all good to move on in the next videos and over the next week here. Should be able to move on to creating the other terrains and whatever else we need to do, but this is what we're going to be using to create that detail of these terrains in the final video. And I actually, in this render, I did forget to plug in that mask attribute, so that's why this bottom is displaced, whereas down here it is not. So if I were to re-render this, you'd see that that would all go away. But overall, that is the general idea here. You can just delete out half of the geometry. Take a second to load. There we go. So delete off half of the geometry of our height field, and then we can just reference the other half, which is a Control-Shift-Alt-Drag on the nodes that you want to reference, and we can just merge those back together later on. Like I said, this isn't actually set up fully yet. I was just making sure that we were good on one half, and I also will need to make sure that we set this up to be just the render geometry, and we'll use this height field that we have right here as our proxy geometry, or maybe even lower the settings on this so it's not so what's the word, so detailed, just to keep our viewport nice and smooth. But anyways, that is the general idea of our height field setup. like I said, we'll move on in the next videos. And if you want to grab any of the project files as well as all the assets that we create, you can grab them on Patreon. But anyways, thank you guys for your support on this project. You guys seem to be enjoying it. I am enjoying it and looking forward to continuing on with it here over the next few videos and get hopefully a cool result out in the end. But anyways, thank you guys for watching and have a good day.